Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast for military and veterans. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, and provide value and solutions to help make life more abundant. Thanks for stopping by to another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Cece. She was in the Navy for 10 years, stationed in Virginia, California, and then Virginia again. She joined in 2010 and got out in 2020 and got out of the military as an E5. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So, like you said before, I was in the Navy for 10 years. And I joined in 2010. And you know how everybody goes through boot camp and everything like that. Well, I had to go to school, and my schooling was actually in Florida for a little bit for my specific job that I was training for. And I had so much fun, like absolutely so much fun. I had an absolute blast there. I learned so much about myself, mostly that I really enjoyed not having parents to rely on to like tell me what to do. There were a lot of people that talked about how when you go to A school or whatever branch of service you were in, for us it was called A school, that the military kind of holds you on this, like, sort of treats you like a child. Well, to me, I felt like an adult. I felt like I was finally free for the first time in my life, and it was awesome. I had never experienced freedom like that, and I kind of went a little bit crazy. But by the time I had finally made it to my first duty station, I was ready to work, and I was super motivated, and I was really excited. And I met with a great group of people, and this group of people, oh my gosh, like we could do absolutely anything that we wanted together. My first duty station was in Virginia Beach. And when I got to my first command, I was so ready to get back to work. And I learned so much about the aircraft that I was working on, because that was the field that I was working in. And I was ready to go. And that group of people that I was telling you about, like, we got along so well. We did absolutely everything together. We went to parties, and yeah, I mean, there was underage drinking, because I'm pretty sure everybody does that. Am I ashamed of it? No. Do I encourage it? Definitely not. But it's something that I did, and I can't exactly, say that I didn't. I'm not a liar. It's not something that I do. But it is something that I did, and I'm not proud of it. But I ended up getting really close with like one person in particular, and I ended up getting to know them quite a bit, and we ended up developing like a really good relationship. It wasn't like we were dating or anything like that, but it did turn into a sexual relationship, and things were going great. And then there was one night I had gone over to a party, and I had a lot to drink that night. And I just started to feel really, really tired. So I told them that I was going to go lay down, because I was too tired to go over to where I was staying, and I fell asleep. And apparently when you fall asleep in somebody's bed that you have slept with in the past, that gives them total rights to your body. I didn't catch that memo. And so I ended up being assaulted that night. And it was absolutely horrifying. It was one of the worst experiences that I had ever had in my life up to that moment. After that had happened, I remember I had gone to the bathroom, and I decided that I I needed to do something to make myself feel better. So I just vomited. And then that turned into, I don't know if you've ever heard it called this, but it turned into the double dragon, where it comes out both ends. I know that I was also drinking, but it it had a lot to do with like the way that I was feeling, the anxiety, maybe a little bit of the alcohol. But that person didn't even notice; they stayed asleep. And then after that, I was in complete denial, and I completely ignored that had ever happened to me. I went on about my life. I continued hanging out with the group. I never spent time with that person one-on-one ever again. But I definitely, you know, I definitely just pretended that it didn't happen. It wasn't until at my first command, probably a year and a half later, that we had this sort of all female meeting. And that's where they had told us about like a more in depth version of the SAPR program and why it is so important. Um, and I remember in this meeting, there was this lady, she had come up and she had told her story about what had happened to her. And her story sounded so similar to mine. I'm trying not to get emotional about it, but that's when I realized that what had happened to me wasn't okay. That was when I had realized that everything that happened was not okay. Like, nobody has a right to your body. Just because you've had sex with them before in the past doesn't give them a right to continue to sleep with you whenever they want. Consent is a two-way street. And just because you're not saying no doesn't mean that you're not consenting. It doesn't mean that what happened wasn't an assault. It doesn't mean what happened wasn't traumatizing. And so I decided to officially tell somebody about it for the first time. After I had gone to that meeting and I heard that lady's story, I decided that I was going to tell one of the SAPR victim advocates that was there. They had introduced themselves to the group at the beginning of this meeting, and afterwards, like, there was one person kind of like stuck out in my mind. So I went to that person individually and I told them about what had happened. And that was when I decided to do a restricted report. And everything was going fine. And I finally felt happy. Like, I kind of felt like, I don't know, I felt like I had done something right about what had happened, for the first time. I mean, I know that I was ignoring it. And so, like, my life seemed normal and it seemed fine. But after I like told the truth about what had happened to me, everything changed, but I felt better in like some really weird way. But anyway, I had I was continuing on with my work, and I've realized that I was going to be going on a deployment. The command that I was in was getting ready to go on deployment. And when you get ready to go on deployments, you go on like these little detachments and stuff. So you go to different parts of the country for different training. And that's when you get ready, for deployment. And that's like when you meet everybody that you're going to be going on deployment with too, not just your command, but like the rest of the commands that are going to be part of your group that are going on this deployment. And that's when I had realized that the person that had assaulted me was in the same group of people. He was in my command, but he was in another command that I was going to be going on deployment with. And it was in that moment that I decided that I can't keep this a restricted report. I need to do something about it. So I decided that I wanted to change my report from restricted to unrestricted. And I did the paperwork. I talked to NCIS and I did everything that I was supposed to do. My command ended up getting involved. And the following day, after I had gone through the process of talking to NCIS, and after my actual command was notified about an incident, they had called a command quarters, and they decided that they were going to say that there was an incident that had happened and that we all needed to be on our best behavior because it's unacceptable. Meanwhile, every single person in the command knew that I was the one person that had to leave during work. So it was pretty much known that I was the person that this incident had happened to, even though it didn't happen there, but it still happened. And then afterwards, I started becoming sort of targeted. Like, there were some people that were more supportive. There were other people that would look at me and they were like, oh gosh, she's the rat. She's the one that's trying to make our lives miserable. She's the reason why we can't have men and women in the same room. And so I just became that person. And that was really rough for a bit, but I had more support than I guess I did negative, or at least I felt like I had more support because the group of friends that I had was actually very close. And I was able to tell my close friends what had happened to me, and I explained to them what was going on because it was unrestricted at that point, and I was like, I'm done. Like, I don't need to keep it a secret. And the process continued, and nothing really came of it. A couple months passed, and my commanding officer called me into his office, and he told me that my case was going to be getting dropped due to lack of evidence. And he literally said, it's a he said, she said situation. It can't go forward. We need your decision in 24 hours if you want to deploy with us or if you want to get transferred to another location. And I had 24 hours to make that huge decision. Well, I didn't want to go anywhere else because the people that I had were like the people that I worked with at that point now were my support system. So I decided that I was going to stay, and I thought that I would be strong enough to do it because I am really good at ignoring my emotions, or at least I was, not so much anymore. But I decided to go on that deployment, and I saw that person damn near every day for that entire deployment, and it was absolutely miserable. But I got through it, and it made me, in some really weird way, at least this is what I tell myself, it made me stronger because I refuse to say it made me weaker. I use that like on my rough days. If I can get through that deployment, I can get through anything. So anyway, I ended up using that as a motivation at my following command in California to become a victim advocate myself. I want to be the person that people feel that they can come to, and I want to advocate for them. I wanted to make sure that they felt like they had a safe space, a safe place, a safe person to talk to, and I wanted to be that for them. And so I did. I became a victim advocate, and it was great. And then I finally leave my second command in California, and I go back to Virginia. And this is towards the end of my career now. And this is, I finally get to my final command, and things are kind of slow. I had just gone through like a pretty weird breakup, but I was in a fairly good place. But I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but everywhere you go, if you have somebody that was at one of your previous commands and they happen to be in the same location as you, it gets you excited. So you want to spend time with them. You want to see them. You want to be like, oh my gosh, let's catch up. Let's grab a beer. Let's, talk. What have you been up to? It's so nice to see a friendly face, especially like when you don't feel at home anymore. Like, yes, I was stationed in Virginia before, but it was nice to be able to catch up with people. And I chose the wrong person to catch up with because it had happened again. And that is the most that I can say about that situation. But that ended up destroying my mental health. The second one did. I ended up needing to advocate for myself. And it was rough. And I ended up getting out of the military because at that point, seeing men in a uniform was triggering. Still, to this day, seeing men in a military uniform is triggering. I decided to move away from one of the places that I loved most in the world, which was Virginia. And I decided to move to a completely different state. And I am semi-happy now, but I feel like I would be in a much better place if I had never had to go through that. And that's pretty much my Navy story.
Well, thank you, Cece, for sharing your story, and thank you for being vulnerable enough to share that story. I know it's not easy talking about stuff like that. Can I ask, as far as how your mental health was handled, especially after you made the restricted report, do you feel that you got the support that you needed from the military, from chain of command, or, the people around you? I know you said you had a support system, but do you feel from
Mhm.
like a military standpoint that you got that support you needed for your mental health after you reported that incident?
The first time, no. Um, the first time I had told them that I started suffering from panic attacks and stuff because I thought that I was seeing that person everywhere I went. And so they put me in with a psychologist. Oh, no, I'm sorry, a psychiatrist, a medical psychiatrist that was active duty military. And as I was explaining to them that I couldn't handle the word rape at that time. And I know that word, even now, like it's still difficult to say. I can hear it now and not like completely shut down. But at the time, that was an extremely horrible word for me because it's something that like I could not handle that word. Sexual assault was fine, but I couldn't handle that. And my psychiatrist just kept repeatedly saying it over and over and over again during my session. We had a 30-minute session, and remember I had counted. She had said it 15 times in a 30-minute session. Why you would even need to say it that many times in an hour or 30 minutes or even in a day, I don't know. But she did it. And I ended up like on the floor in the fetal position. And she was like, "Yeah, I think you need medication." And that was it. And she not so I don't want to say she escorted me out, but she definitely hurried me. Like she like I can't even really explain it, but she like put her arm like around me. She's like, "Okay, you got to get up. Like I have another person. Like it's okay. This is a safe space, but not right here." You know, she's like, "Luckily you're in a hospital." And I was like, "Oh, you're kidding me? Like, what?" This is supposed to be my safe space. Like, and I understand that you have people too, but that was like the worst encounter I had ever had medically.
Did you end up going back?
I had to pick up the medication, but I requested a different psychiatrist. And when I was at the front, because I had to go in for another appointment, and uh, I told them that I did not want to see her, and they put me in with somebody else. And that person that they put me with was amazing. And they had a group. They had like a group of girls. Like they had like this group for victims of MST, and they let me go to this group with them. And I think it was like a couple times a month that they would have this meeting, and that was when I realized that I wasn't alone. I think for like the first time, I realized that like I wasn't like alone as far as like this type of thing happening to somebody, you know. Unfortunately, I realized it was more common than I had thought. Like that was sort of like my eye-opening experience, but um, it was also really comforting at the same time to know that I wasn't the only person that was going through that scenario, you know.
Right. So, and I hear this a lot from people of just experiencing sexual assault in the military and not realizing that what happened to them was sexual assault. And so, my next question for you is, do you feel that going through boot camp and the initial training pipeline, that the military properly educated you so that you felt empowered to know what sexual assault actually was?
Mm, no, I really don't think so. Um, because but, like especially when I was going through boot camp and they had the training, as soon as like any topic of like sapper came up, they would sort of make it seem like, and now we have to talk about this topic because apparently it's an issue. So let's get through it, kind of thing. And so like their mentality alone was not exactly something that like made your ears perk up, you know. It wasn't something that made you want to listen. Um, at that point, they were like, okay, great. It's just another topic that they have to get through. So it's not exactly something that you would pay attention to. I feel that if they didn't, I feel that if they need to treat sapper a little bit more seriously. And I know I keep saying sapper, but that's just because I don't know what every other branch calls it. Um, but I feel that it needs to be taken a lot more seriously and not just something that they need to get through at a command function. It needs to be way more serious. There is no real education. They give like a basis definition of it, but they don't really get into anything else other than that.
Right. And I mean, for me, I joined a few years after you. Um,
Hmm.
and, I felt the same with my experience, but I'm just curious, when you went through boot camp, was there any mention of anything mental health at all? Because I know for me, like, I can't remember anything being talked about. But I'm curious if, like, at any point, or maybe when you went through, if that was ever talked about in boot camp.
I don't think so. I think that, I mean, they always said that like if you have a hard time that you can talk to a chaplain, but that was about it. And that was the only thing that I can remember. And the only reason that is because I needed to speak to a chap because I'm kind of dumb and I failed the first test twice, and they thought that I was struggling mentally, and so they wanted me to get in there because it's not that I had too much responsibility. It was because I'm a girl and I couldn't control my emotions, so they put me in through there. So I definitely think that there was like some sexist motivation behind that, but that's just because I'm a raging feminist now. Um, so there is that. It's that took a lot of hindsight thought, but I mean, that's pretty much the extent of the mental health training that I can even think of them bringing up.
I mean, I know when I went through, there was still like a weird mentality towards females. And that was in
Mm-hmm.
2015. So I can only
Mm-hmm.
imagine that when you went through, it was probably worse, if not similar.
I can't even begin to tell you the internalized misogyny that they had basically like brainwashed me into having, especially after my first assault. After my first assault, I immediately hated like being compared to vulnerable women. So I was automatically on the team of like guys bashing women. I was along with them. Like that was just the environment. And I hate that I was ever like that. I am absolutely ashamed and disgusted with myself about that. But at the same time, like I don't want to cover it up by saying it was a trauma response because it could have just been the fact that I was 19, you know, could have just been the fact that I was young. But it could have also been because the fact that I was 19 and dealing with an assault that I refused to acknowledge at the same time. So, um, yeah, the environment was not exactly great towards women.
As far as your command and how they handled your first assault, do I mean, I'm just kind of mind blown at like what you said about how, there was an all hands called, and um they gave you 24 hours to make this decision, and how you felt that that was handled. Do you feel like you were supported by your command when you made that report?
Mm, yes and no. At the time, I at the time I was in such a vulnerable position that anybody that showed my support, I felt that it was coming from a wide group of people, and I just tried to ignore the negative as much as possible. Um, Whenever I talk about the negative experiences, it's me literally thinking back on it. It's me realizing and looking at the whole picture. I actually have like this funny joke, especially considering 2020, but you know how people say hindsight is 2020, it kind of puts a whole new spin on things considering how 2020 was. But it really is true because um like when I do think back on it now, I don't think it was handled very well at all. At the time, just simply because of how vulnerable I was, and because there were a few individualized people that were great for me, but that's about it. I think that in general it just wasn't good. I actually at my first command I had tried to become a victim advocate at my first command, and they told me that I couldn't because I had been assaulted, and that I was the worst person for the job. Instead, they allowed, I do remember that they had allowed a male to go for being or they allowed this guy to become a victim advocate to go through the training and everything like that. And I have nothing against men being victim advocates. I think that there need to be more men victim advocates. There needs to be more male victim advocates out there. But this one in particular, what had so many complaints against him for harassment. and they wanted him to be a victim advocate. They chose him, all because it would make his eval that much better.
Wow.
So instead of like allowing me, who was very, very, very passionate about it, I'm still very passionate about that program in general. I think that there needs to be more people in there that have a passion for it. Obviously, I also think that you should go to therapy if you are a victim advocate. I just want to throw that out there too. For anybody that is a victim advocate, go to therapy. It's super important. But I hate the way that the command handled that in general. It was horrible. Very negative.
I was going to ask if you feel that overall your experience with mental health, with everything all encompassing, if it was more positive or negative.
Mm, it didn't become more positive until after my last assault, the one that ended up getting me out of the military, because I ended up getting medically discharged, like medically retired, and just that process alone. I was told about so many more resources. So in that aspect, the resources alone, there's like a mind-blowing amount of resources available to you in the military. It's just difficult to access them. And if you don't know how to answer the questions, or if you don't know how to ask the questions, I mean, it's going to be very difficult for you to even know about them. So the resources are there. It's just you're not going to know about them unless you're put into a situation that they're required to tell you about. For example, getting medically retired. And at that point, you're at the end of your career. Maybe you wouldn't need to be at the end of your career if you were told about these resources earlier on, you know? So yes, it was good towards the end of my career, but that's simply because they were required to tell me about these resources as I was leaving.
That's interesting
So,
because I didn't even know about that. I mean, I think I kind of did to an extent, but it's kind of one of those vague things where the information's kind of there, but you don't really know if it applies to you. And yeah, no,
mm-hmm,
I 100% agree with just really kind of the general statement of there's so many resources, but
mm-hmm.
you don't know about it unless you happen to be talking to the right person at the right time, right situation.
Or like
So
they're required to tell you about it because of the certain position that you're in, like getting medically retired, you know?
right, right. So is there anything that you think would have made things better for you?
Um, Honestly, I think that if the military was better when it came to prosecuting um, the people, like when it came to prosecuting the people that actually commit these crimes, if they actually were better at it instead of just getting a slap on the wrist and saying no, and then all of a sudden the next thing you know, they're a chief or an officer, you know? um, like, I don't know if you've heard this joke, but like you don't really get to become a chief until you've had at least a sexual assault and a DUI, and then boom, you're winning, you're a shoo-in for it. Um, that was just like a thing that was said as I was in the military. And so I really wish that wasn't even a thing. I wish that wasn't a saying, because it's stuff like that that encourages this horrible kind of behavior, and stuff like that that makes it way more difficult on people than it should. I understand that, you don't join the military in order to have like a good, like, happy life. I get that, but you also don't join the military to be assaulted.
My final question for you, Cece, is if you were in charge of the Navy, what would you do to make mental health and even sexual assault, we'll encompass everything together. What would you do to make those things better for service members?
I would definitely try to make that way more of a priority. Like, I understand that, the mission is very, very important. The military is a whole other beast, and I understand that completely. But in order for you to have like a functioning, like, you have to make sure that you oil all of the parts in whatever machine you're working. And for us, like for the military, your parts are your people, and you need to take better care of your people. And the most important part of your people is their freaking brain, and their mental health is so important. You need to make that more of a priority. Also, like I said, I would I would always take the side of the person saying this happened to me. I always believe somebody when they tell me something happened to them. Always. And I think that is so important. You can always believe them initially. And if things end up not making sense, because that it is true, it is very possible that, somebody can lie about a situation like that. But even then, they may not be lying about the entire situation. They just might be lying about certain parts. You know what I mean? I still fully believe that if somebody says something, that they're not 100% lying. I just want to make sure that people, I think that it needs to be handled a lot better. I think that prosecution needs to be way more intense. It needs to stop being such a long process. The reason why people have to wait 3 years for a trial is beyond me, when especially for something like this. But if you steal money, you're kicked out in a day, or if you smoke marijuana, you're kicked out in a day. Like, how does that make sense? But you get assaulted and you have to wait for 3 years. That's ridiculous to me. So that would change. That would be one of the first things that I change.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen in today. Each week, I'll be bringing you value in the mental health space and its direct impact on service members and veterans. If you feel you personally got value today from this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a 5-star rating and review and share this to your audience. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.